Have you ever wondered what it would be like to be frozen in time? To have your body preserved for centuries, waiting for the day when science could bring you back to life. It may sound like science fiction, but it's a reality for some people. Join us as we delve into the world of frozen time and explore the stories of 15 people who have become frozen in time, frozen in history, or even frozen for eternity. Number 1. Dashi Dorzo Itagilov. Born in 1852, Dashi Dorzo Itagilov was a highly educated man who had earned degrees in medicine and philosophy. He became the head of Buddhism in Russia and played a crucial role in the revival of the religion amongst the Burats, an indigenous Siberian people. But his story took a strange turn in 1926 when he warned his students about the Red Teaching that was coming and advised them to flee to Tibet. He then began preparing for his death by altering his diet and gathering his students. Upon his death in 1927, he was then quietly buried in a wooden box in the position in which he died, but his body was not actually meant to remain buried forever. At his request, the monks had checked on his body after 30 years and found it to be well preserved. They then checked again in 1973 and found the body in the same remarkable condition. It was not safe to transport his body to the shrine until the collapse of the Soviet Union, and then in 2002, it was finally moved to Russia 75 years after his passing. It would be publicly displayed then for the first time. Examinations would reveal that although the body had somewhat decomposed since being exhumed, it was still in an astonishing condition of preservation. According to accounts of the observations, the remains were found to be in the condition of someone who had simply died 36 hours ago. The muscles, inner tissues, soft joints, and skin all remained intact without any signs of decay, and some have even claimed that Itagilov sits inside a special glass sarcophagus on the second floor of his palace. Number 2. Justin Smith. Imagine finding your loved one lifeless in frozen and blue snow with no pulse or sign of life. That was the scene that Don Smith would discover when he found his son Justin lying in a foot of snow in Pennsylvania. A coroner was on the scene and the state police were investigating the death, but miraculously, Justin wasn't actually dead. Thanks to cutting-edge emergency medicine, Justin's story is a shining example of how doctors can bring frozen people back from the brink of death. Justin had been out with some friends and was walking home when he collapsed and fell unconscious in the freezing -4°F Pennsylvania temperatures in February of 2015. Justin had no pulse when he was discovered, and his body was frozen stiff. The emergency team at Lehigh Valley Hospital in Hazleton had little hope for him, but they had a secret weapon, the ECMO machine. This machine was the key to warming up Justin's blood and returning him from the brink of death. As Justin's body temperature began to warm, his heart started beating once again. However, doctors were still unsure if he would survive, and if he did, whether he would have suffered life-changing brain damage while unconscious. Neurologists found no signs of brain activity in their initial scans as Justin laid there in a coma, but within a few days, tests began to show his brain was actually recovering. The doctors were jubilant, believing that a miracle had unfolded before them. Number 3. Mitsutaka Ichikoshi. While being lost in a mountain forest without food or water for over 3 weeks and going into a state similar of hibernation to survive may sound like a script for a Hollywood movie, it was a true fact for Mitsutaka Uchikoshi, a Japanese civil servant. After a barbecue with some colleagues, the 35-year-old decided to walk down Mount Rako in western Japan, but missed his way, slipped in a stream, and broke his pelvis. He then went missing for 24 days until a passing climber would find him. By then, his body temperature had fallen to just 22 degrees Celsius, and he had a barely discernible pulse, suffering from multiple organ failures and blood loss. Doctors believe that he had fallen into a state that was similar to hibernation, as the temperature on the mountain dropped as low as 10 degrees Celsius. It's theorized that he must have fallen asleep after his fall, and doctors who treated him were amazed, believing that he had recovered 100% before being discharged from the hospital. Dr. Shinichi Sato, the hospital's emergency department director, would claim the patient entered a condition like hibernation, in which several of his organs had slowed down, but his brain was kept safe. Experts call this case revolutionary as it remains unclear how he had managed to survive for over 3 weeks with his metabolism almost at a standstill. Some scientists believe that human hibernation could slow cells and death when treating brain hemorrhaging and other fatal conditions. Number 4. Erika Nordby. Erika Nordby's story is one that captured the hearts of people around the world, and it's hard to imagine what could have happened if her mother had not found her in time. It was a Friday in February of 2001 when Erika had wandered outside while her mother and younger sister slept. The temperatures in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada were at sub-zero levels, and Erika was wearing only a diaper. When Erika's mother had found her, the little girl was curled up in a ball, her hands frozen beneath her body. According to her, she picked the baby up and she felt frozen. It was the worst feeling ever because she was stiff within her arms. Thankfully, though, Erika would be rushed to the Children's Health Center, where she was then treated for hypothermia. While initially in the intensive pediatric unit, Erika had been moved to a regular hospital room, and doctors were optimistic about her recovery. Dr. Alf Comrade, director of the hospital's pediatric unit, would report that Erika was interacting with her mother and playful. She was uttering words like mom and down. However, there were still concerns about frostbite in her toes and fingers, and some even thought that there may have been a need for amputation because of damage, but that was later considered to be an unnecessary procedure. Erika needed skin grafts on her feet and physiotherapy in order to walk again, but she would miraculously be released from the hospital just 6 weeks later and became known as the Miracle Baby, featured in media worldwide. She would end up suffering no permanent damage except for some scarring and deformations on her left foot that required some special footwear. Erika had fully recovered despite being pronounced clinically dead, and her heart had stopped beating for 2 hours. Number 5. Iwa Wisniewska. Paragliding is an incredible sport that is not for the faint of heart. It's not enough to have a high adrenaline threshold. You also need to be able to withstand harsh weather conditions, freezing temperatures, and sometimes lightning strikes. These are precisely the challenges that Iwa Wisniewska faced and survived when she was taken by a storm cloud to an altitude of nearly 10,000 meters, where she then flew unconscious for about an hour. Iwa had been training for the Paragliding World Championships when she was swept up by storm clouds. Her ascent was clocked at 20 meters per second and her descent at 33 meters per second by an onboard tracking system. She had regained consciousness in midair up to an hour later, covered in ice and suffering from severe frostbite. It's a miracle that she even survived, and even more incredible is that she could make a safe landing, albeit 60 kilometers from her launch site. Her story is mind-blowing. It's like winning the lottery 10 times in a row. The previous altitude survival record for a paraglider was 24,000 feet, and she managed to survive at an altitude higher than Mount Everest, where the temperature was about minus 50 degrees Celsius. Her injuries were severe, with bruises all over her body from hailstones and frostbite to her extremities. Her ears were nearly frozen, but what makes this story so incredible is not only that she survived, but she did so while being unconscious. Number 6. Jean Hilliard. On a freezing December evening of 1980, Jean Hilliard's car hit the ditch on an icy gravel road just south of Lyngby, Minnesota. Despite the biting cold, she had walked 2 miles away to a friend's house, but that was the last thing that she remembered. When she was found the next morning in the front yard of a local cattle rancher, she was frozen solid as a log. She would then be taken to the hospital, where doctors' attempts to revive her seemed hopeless. But, against all odds, Jean Hilliard recovered and lived to tell the incredible tale. Doctors couldn't get an IV into her frozen arm, and she was thought to be mostly dead. The only thing left to do was to try and warm her up. Doctors would use heating pads, and a prayer chain was begun. At mid-morning, Hilliard had woke up in spasms, and she was talking coherently by noon. In only a few hours, she had gone from being a frozen block of ice to a teenager that was worried about her father finding out that his car was in the ditch. The fact that she healed utilizing heating pads and a prayer chain made her case unique. To warm a patient's important organs from the inside, doctors now utilize a unique machine that pumps the patient's blood via a heater. However, in 1980, there was none at that small hospital, and she survived anyways. Number 7. Ted Williams. Ted Williams is a legendary baseball player who was frozen after his death in 2002 in a process that is now known as cryopreservation. This decision sparked much controversy and debate amongst his family and the general public. It's not every day that somebody famous decides to undergo such a procedure. Ted Williams' case is even more intriguing because he was not the only one who wanted to be cryopreserved. His son John Henry actually joined him a few years later. There are many questions that surround his decision to be cryopreserved. His will clearly stated that he wished to be cremated and have his ashes scattered throughout the Florida Keys. However, his son and daughter, John Henry and Claudia, decided to send his body to the Alcor Life Extension Foundation in Arizona for cryopreservation. This decision would cause a legal dispute between them and Ted's eldest daughter, Bobby Jo Farrell, who was unhappy with their decision. However, a legally binding family pact confirmed Ted's desire to be cryopreserved, and Bobby Jo dropped her charges. However, what about Ted's son? Number 8. John Henry Williams. John Henry Williams is the son of baseball legend Ted Williams and passed away from leukemia at age 35. But unlike his father's controversial burial, John Henry was clear about his wishes to have his remains cryogenically preserved and housed with his father's at Alcor in Scottsdale, Arizona. The younger Williams' will, filed shortly after his death, specifically dictates that his body be cryonically suspended by Alcor Life Extension Foundation. This decision puts to rest doubts about his wishes and avoids the legal circus that surrounds his father's death. John Henry's sister had provided him with a bone marrow transplant, but unfortunately it was not enough to save his life. He had battled leukemia for quite a long time, just as his father had battled heart disease before passing away 2 years earlier. John Henry's decision to be cryogenically frozen has sparked controversy amongst some, but many see it as a way to honor his father's legacy. Ted Williams was famously frozen after his death, and his son's decision to follow in his footsteps only seems fitting. Number 9. Dick Clair. Dick Clair, a familiar face in the television industry, has been chilling at Alcor Life Extension Foundation for over 3 decades. His dedication to cryogenic preservation was so intense that he willed half of his estate to the cryonics facility. But that's not even the half of it. He was in as early as the 1960s, Dick Clair was already a member of the Cryonics Society of California. His fascination with cryonic preservation would lead him to contribute $20,000 to the TransTime Cryonics organization so a married couple could be cryopreserved in liquid nitrogen. But his biggest legal battle came in the form of a lawsuit that he had filed against the California Public Health Service. Under the pseudonym of John Rowe, he sued to ensure that his body would be taken by Alcor upon his death without any issues. He would emerge victorious, setting a precedent that would benefit all cryonic labs and the rights of bodies after death. Number 10. FM 2030. What if you could live forever? It sounds like science fiction, but for FM 2030, it was a reality. FM 2030 was a philosopher, writer, and former Olympic wrestler who believed that humans could become synthetic post-biological organisms and live forever. So much so that he changed his name from his given Italian name to FM 2030 after the year that he would turn 100, hoping that he would still be around to see it. After a battle with pancreatic cancer, though, in 2000, FM 2030 had himself cryogenically frozen in amorphous ice at the Alcor Life Extension Foundation, hoping to be revived when technology advances enough. And he's not alone in his desires for eternal life. As the strange but fascinating independent film 2030, the film chronicles his story and reanimation process. FM 2030 was not simply a transhumanist, but a writer, thinker, and diplomat. The conventional left and right would no longer matter in politics, he prophesied, and people would instead be divided into upwingers and downwingers, the former looking to the future and the latter to the past. He said that he was a 21st century person who was unintentionally propelled into the 20th century, and he had a fascinating personality and a strong longing for the future. It's now been over 2 decades since FM 2030 was frozen, and he's yet to be revived, but with advances in technology, who knows what the future may hold. Perhaps one day we'll all be synthetic post-biological organisms, living forever and shedding our cultural baggage just like FM 2030 had predicted. Number 11. The Maiden. The Maiden was a teenage girl when she was chosen for a ritual sacrifice to the gods. She would be left on a mountaintop with 2 other children to succumb to the cold. The discovery of her mummified remains would reveal rich details about ancient Inca life, such as the ceremonial tunic and headpiece that she wore, symbolizing her new status as a messenger to the heavens. The mummy was so well preserved that National Geographic explorer in residence Johann Renard described it as the best preserved of any mummy he had ever seen. It's quite the statement, considering that he had previously discovered a frozen mummy dubbed the Ice Maiden in Peru in 1995. The maiden's body would be found with finely braided hair, and scientists discovered that she had drunk corn liquor to put her to sleep before the sacrifice. Her mouth had also held cocoa leaf fragments, which the Inca chewed to lessen the effects of altitude sickness. A museum now displays her in a refrigerated, low-oxygen environment to recreate the high-altitude conditions that allowed for its remarkable and natural preservation. The mummies of the other 2 children sacrificed alongside her remain in storage for further study. Number 12. Stella Berntsen. It was a normal winter day in Sweden when 7-year-old Stella Berntsen asked her parents if she could go outside and play in the snow. But little did they know that this innocent request would lead to a harrowing experience that would go down in history. Temperatures were below freezing, and Stella's parents were busy preparing for Christmas when they realized that their daughter was missing. Panic would set in as they searched high and low for her, fearing for the worst. But after 20 neighbors had joined in the search party, they then discovered footsteps which led to a cliff's edge just 100 feet from the house. It seemed as though all hope was lost until her father followed the footprints down the cliff and they found footsteps that led directly into the ocean. The Coast Guard and fishermen were then called in, and after 3 to 4 hours of being in the water, a helicopter would spot Stella's body. When Stella arrived at the hospital in Gothenburg, her body's temperature was just 13 degrees Fahrenheit, and she showed no signs of life. But with careful warming, her heart then began to beat again, and after a month of intensive recovery and care, she would make a full recovery. Stella's story is nothing short of miraculous. Her survival is credited to the fact that the cold water helped to preserve her body and put her into a deep state of hibernation. Number 13. Beck Weathers. Beck Weathers was a man on a mission. He wanted to conquer Everest, and nothing was going to stop him, not even his physical limitations. Weathers had undergone a procedure which would correct his short-sightedness, but his corneas had changed the shape at altitude, leaving him partially blind. Despite all of that, he set off with teammates for the summit, only to be forced to know that they were passing him by due to his lack of vision. But this was only the beginning of Weathers' ordeal. A vicious storm descended upon the mountain, trapping him and his fellow climbers, and Weathers became delirious, losing consciousness as hypothermia would set in. A mountain guide and doctor would declare him beyond salvation, and his wife was told that he had died. However, against all odds, he woke up 24 hours later. His right hand was frozen solid and suffering from hypoxia, but he was still alive. It's a miracle that nobody had seen before, a man waking up from a hypothermic coma at a high altitude. Weathers' survival was due in part to his sheer determination to live. Despite being encouraged to abandon a fellow climber, he refused to leave his friend behind, even though it would mean endangering his life. He waited patiently for his guide to return, and when he didn't, he refused to give up hope. He survived against all odds, overcoming not only the elements, but also his own physical limitations. His story is one of triumph over adversity, of hope in the face of despair. It's a story that inspires everyone to push themselves beyond their limits, to never give up, and to always hold on to hope. Number 14. Gardel Martin. In an extraordinary turn of events, 22-month-old Gardel Martin from Pennsylvania fully recovered after his lifeless body had been pulled out of an icy creek. The toddler had fallen into the stream that ran through their 5-acre property and was swept away by the fast-moving current. Gardel would be rescued after being caught up in a tree branch, and an ambulance crew found no pulse, beginning CPR that would continue unbroken for 101 minutes. The boy's body temperature was just 25 degrees Celsius when he arrived at the hospital, and in this instance, Gardel's severe hypothermia had served him well by drastically lowering his metabolism and providing his organs with some degree of protection from cardiac arrest. After hours of CPR and slowly warming up his body, Gardell's heart would then restart, and he then regained consciousness, stunning doctors with his normal brain functions. Gardell's doctors would call his survival story absolutely extraordinary, and his recovery rate was well beyond what they could have ever imagined. The toddler's mother was grateful for the act of God that had saved her son's life, saying that God had the right people in the right place at the right time, and that they all had done a wonderful job. Just a week after the harrowing incident, Gardell was already walking and chattering away, although his mother was unsure of how much that he remembered or knew about what had happened to him. The attending physician in the pediatric intensive care unit, Dr. Richard Lambert, would say that Gardell belonged in a rare extreme category for recovery. Number 15. David Blaine. David Blaine may be no stranger to pushing his limits and testing the boundaries of human endurance, but his frozen in time stunt in 2000 was one of the most grueling challenges he had ever faced. Encased in a massive block of ice for nearly 63 hours in Times Square in New York City, Blaine battled sleep deprivation, freezing temperatures, and hallucinations, all before being removed with chainsaws. At the beginning of the stunt, he was determined to face every human fear, but as time would go on, the narrow cocoon that he was confined in made it unbearable. Just 3 hours in, he said there was no way he was going to be able to make it, and then he simply accepted that he had to do it, and that's when it became like a bad trip. Blaine's girlfriend at the time, model Josie Moran, was present during the ordeal, but even she couldn't escape his hallucinations. At one point, Blaine even screamed at her, thinking that she was atop the ice when she was actually standing right next to it. And during his final hour in the ice, Blaine thought that he was inside of a coffin. Despite the concerns of hypothermia, frostbite, and blood clotting, Blaine's mind was his greatest foe during the frozen in time stunt, but in the end, he would emerge victorious, mystified by the entire experience. According to him, he thought that he had died and that he had woken up, and that this was where he was. He couldn't bend or do anything with his legs, and then there was the sleep deprivation, which was the worst. Which of these stunts was worth it? While it may not have done much for Blaine's reputation as a magician, it certainly drew in thousands of curious spectators, and for Blaine, it was just another way to face his fears and push his limits. Which of these stories amazed you the most, and are there any other stories of people who were frozen in time that deserve to be on this list? Let me know all about it in the comments section down below, and I'll see you in the next one.